So I would like to welcome Associate Professor Celeste Lawson and start the presentation.
Thank you very much. Now, can you see my presentation or my
Yes,
notes?
I can see nice and clear, and I can hear you. Yeah.
Great. Can you see the presentation or the notes page?
No, that's always tricky, isn't it? I can see that.
How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, now it's perfect. I can't see anything else.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
I struggle with that too, so good.
Oh, good. Great.
Yeah, so all yours now.
Thank you very much. So this is a joint presentation between myself and Colin, who is the guru, shall we say, of all things learning analytics, and he has really helped gather the data that has informed this this presentation. So I may refer to him to help explain if there are any tricky sort of questions. All right. So this presentation is about public relations and how we have engaged our students in an online environment. PR is pretty much a technological field. We've been operating in the online space for a very long time, and as we moved into forced online with COVID, we weren't impacted quite as severely as some of the other disciplines. And I think it's because we've been operating in the online space for a little while, and I thought it might be worthwhile sharing some of the things that we do in order to engage students online, and also how I know that actually is the techniques and strategies works. As an aside, I was in a presentation yesterday, the Tuesday 1 p.m. session in room B, another education technology session, and it was the presentation by Elizabeth Moore and David Rosenbaum. And if you didn't get a chance to see it, it's well worth looking when the recordings come through. They also were talking about strategies of engagement in online, and they adopted a technique called action learning. And it was a really interesting method of engaging students, and it's not what we did. So the reason I mention it is because it's slightly different to what we did. Anyway, the public relations field, we tend to operate with our assessments using authentic and real-world assessments. We have a great track record of that. We don't have exams. We don't even have lectures, actually. So for a lot of people, a lot of academics, teaching academics, it can be a very confronting methodology. And it's like, how do you teach? How do you engage students? And so that's pretty much what I'm going to try and share with you today. First of all, we need to really think about our cohort. And so our cohort, it's a big consideration for how we structure our units and how we consider our assessment and how we get that engagement and that particularly asynchronous online engagement. So mostly our students in public relations they're distance students. They're mature aged. They tend to be female. They're either working full-time or balancing full-time family commitments, and most of them are already working in the industry. And that's important for us because for some disciplines, you are teaching students who are school leavers about the industry. But for us, a lot of our cohort are already working in the industry. Now, we need to be careful that we balance with that those who are choosing to take our units because they're maybe that part of a minor or a 4-pack in another degree, and they are choosing to take our units to learn about the industry as opposed to upskilling in the industry. So we've got to be very careful that we can balance that. But for a lot of our students, they already come in with some industry knowledge, not necessarily the academic knowledge, but some industry knowledge of public relations. So given in mind that we already understand our cohort, the students do tend to prefer asynchronous interactions. That is, that not necessarily real time. So historically, students don't tend to come to tutorials if we have a tutorial. If we plan a Zoom session, they don't tend to come to Zoom sessions. We don't tend to get that one-on-one, face-to-face interaction. So the students prefer tasks that are asynchronous, that is, that they can complete at their own time, in their own pace, and in their own way. And again, it's rethinking how or what it is to be university teaching when you consider that that's, you know, we're not a sage on the stage anymore. We are trying to get the students to engage in their own pace at their own time. So bearing in mind that we don't have lectures, we do try and really encourage asynchronous interactions. So how do we encourage our students? And the answer is that we try to assign tasks, and I'll talk about assessment, real world assessment, but we assign tasks that require multiple steps, and that is that it requires the students to engage with the Moodle site or engage with the assessment task multiple times. So they have to come back. So they don't just click and forget and move on. They've got to click and then they've got to come back and click again. So in that way, it really does engage the students. So for example, we might pose a question that not only requires the student to answer the question, but also requires them to look at other answers of that question. So it's a multi-step process. So they look at the question, answer the question themselves, and then look at the other answers that have been posted at another time, and then come back and respond to those sort of questions. So it's a multi-step process. We also do like interactions like polls, things that really encourage diversity of contribution, so other forms of interactive comment that encourages students to come back on multiple occasions. Well, a lot of our assessments, not all, by the way, but a lot of our assessments are teamwork assessments. And so the teamwork is both graded or voluntary. And so a lot of my students want to work in teams, and they'll do it without even having the grade assigned, which I know is quite an alien concept for a lot of disciplines. But at the same time, we also have teamwork assessments that is graded. And that students then do have to interact with other students, and it forces is not the right word, encourages that level of engagement. We also encourage students to use the forums or some sort of teams, perhaps, where they are encouraged to post regularly and to post questions publicly. So instead of asking a question of the lecturer in an email, we encourage our students to share their thoughts publicly and post questions to which the other students are also encouraged to answer questions. In this way, the way that we can couch that is that we can make that real world and authentic, in that in public relations particularly, students are going to be putting their words on paper for other people to read. So it's actually reflecting the type of work that they will do in future as a public relations practitioner. So in this way, the students can post something, even though they know it's part of their study and their unit content, but it's replicating the type of work that they would be required to do as a public relations practitioner. That's up to me as the lecturer to remind students of that, and to encourage students that by posting publicly, we are teaching them a graduate attribute that they will apply as a public relations practitioner. So it's up to me to sell that to the students, or else they won't engage and they won't contribute, because they won't see the point of it. They won't understand why they have to contribute. So the what was I going to say? Lost my train of thought. The engagement itself is not necessarily graded. So we don't say you have to post X number of times on Moodle to receive a mark. We don't necessarily grade engagement, but we do encourage engagement, and we do make sure the students understand why they're engaging and how that engagement ultimately links with an assessment type or a graduate attribute. And I think that element is actually the important take-home message for me as the lecturer, and key technique that I would be trying to share with you. So in terms of whether or not that these techniques work, these graphs are from Colin, who was able to craft together student Moodle activity averages and map that to the final student grades, and the number of student forum contributions also mapped to the student grades. And what we can see from these graphs, and there are other graphs that I haven't included because of the slideshow limitation, what we can see is that the more that students engage, the higher the grade will be, even when that grade is not assigned to the engagement, if you understand what I mean. So it doesn't matter that if you say that if the students, how can I say it? If the students are encouraged to engage on Moodle, the more that they engage, the higher the grade will be, and we are not giving them marks for that engagement. So they're genuinely engaging off their own bat, but the more that they do, the more they are likely, the higher grade they will receive. And in the same with the student forum contributions, the more that they speak to others, the more that they actively engage and reflect on the unit content, again, the higher their grade will be. And that's not rocket science. I think we all recognize that that's kind of instinctual, but we can prove that, and we can also show that there is more engagement. We don't necessarily get engagement from everyone all the time, but we can show that if they don't engage, that they won't necessarily get the mark. Can I just go to Colin, who has some nuance in that those graphs and the other types of things that we've also investigated, Colin?
Yeah, and there is a lot of nuance in these graphs alone. So the question I was asking is, would the high distinction students have been clicking more anyway, because it's linked to their, higher levels of motivation? And so that's part of it. I should say that the N size for this is over 100,000 individual students. So this is taken from an enormous population. So the fact that this pattern exists means there's something there. Whether or not it's causal or not, we just don't know. The other interesting slide that we didn't include, Celeste, was the question marks. So we actually looked at question marks in forum contributions of students, and we simply counted the number of question marks per student per post across an enormous sample size. And what we found there was the distinction and high distinction students asked a lot more questions than the pass, credit, fail students, which is kind of interesting, which is synonymous with higher levels of engagement to begin with, I guess. But the interesting thing with this particular course is the task is very authentic and it is real world, and the students coming into that understand that, and they've been prepared with earlier units by having teamwork in earlier units. So we tend to see higher levels of teamwork engagement for these students coming into the course, which is also a contributing factor. So yeah, very interesting. Is that enough for you, Celeste?
Yeah, thanks. I think that the take-home messages for me is that it's a combination of having the students understand why they're being asked to engage, not just saying to the students, you must engage. And if we can make it real world, and I can say to the students, you're engaging, we're asking you to engage because this is linked to your assessment in some way, or this is what you're going to be expected to do in the real world as a public relations practitioner, it makes that real, authentic experience for the students that they do tend to respect. The other slide that I haven't, or the other graph that I haven't put up, is the student satisfaction. And we can also map high levels of student satisfaction for these units. And that would be an interesting one, actually, Colin, mental note, to map student satisfaction and engagement. The students do respect this type of approach, and I've never had any problems getting engagement from students, and anecdotally I've heard that other disciplines do. So that's what basically prompted me to share this, and it's yeah, that pretty much that's all I really wanted to say.
For me, Celeste, the thing that stands out with this unit in particular is that the assessment is not a single transaction that we often see in other courses. There are multiple opportunities for feedback, and I think that in itself encourages a degree of engagement that we haven't yet proven, but it's on the cards. But I certainly think that assessment drives the learning, and that is a Venn diagram together with engagement, I think. So, yeah, interesting.
And the other thing, I'd circle back to what I was saying at the beginning, is that the way that the students prefer to engage as well, and it's not necessarily going to be the same for every discipline, but for my discipline, the students don't want to work in real time, and in the public relations sector they won't be working in real time. Most students or most public relations practitioners will work in global teams, and they'll be virtual teams, but they'll be working on different time zones, and so that replicates the way that we teach and the way that the students study replicates that interaction across multiple time zones. It's not going to happen in real time, that the students will have to engage regularly and often, and that replicates that, and that's convenient for the students because that's how they are managing their own personal lives. So again,
5 more minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Ermal. I'm happy to take some questions actually at that point.
That's great, because I was actually thinking what an amazing way of teaching when we were talking about adapting and tailoring to the cohort. And I was just reflecting as an academic myself that this would be the future of teaching all of our units, that the student has flexibilities. And it's especially in this environment of lockdown and things, it's the real learning. So yeah, so I think we should more, everybody can take on from this, and the results were amazing in terms of looking at performance as well. So that should be a kind of the, for all university to take on board and see the way that we can really let the student to learn in their own pace, and also that's the better way of learning than rushing them through. So yeah, any questions, any comments to
I think Sarah has a question.
Yeah, Sarah.
Hi, thank you very much, Colin and Celeste, for your presentation. It's very, very interesting, this notion of clickbait, and one, I think it's really powerful that you've got that data to kind of show students, and I don't know if you do show students pretty much the graph between participation and outcome, because we know that some students may be more invested in their studies than others. The one question I did have though was, and it's one that's been circulating a lot, is how much does clickbait engagement encourage like that real world authentic learning, or is it another form of compliance? So to make sure that we've checked you've done the content that we've put up.
Yeah, I think that's a valid question. And it would be very interesting for someone from another discipline to respond to that, because I have made the leap with my discipline and requiring that asynchronous activity, and I can say discipline-wise that is how the industry, when our students graduate, it is how they're going to have to operate. And so in terms of compliance, not so much from my perspective, but I would be very interested to hear if there's anyone from another discipline that does sort of watch to see what their students access. I don't tend to do that, although I do make sure that my assessments are accurately assessing the material that I have provided, if that kind of answers your question, that they are only studying information that is going to be assessed, if that also answers your question. So in other words, in order to complete the assessment, the students are going to have to engage with the material, because if they don't engage with the material, they're not going to be able to complete the assessment. Does that kind of answer your question?
It does, and you do make a valid point in terms of the industry, because I guess I work in education and I work with academics in programming. So, and there's a lot of, particularly in more of those, and sorry anyone in the discipline, those people from science and engineering, that I'm seeing a tendency of, I've created this module, so I'm going to create forums and so forth that you have to respond to, so I know that you've done it, rather than actually supporting their learning. It's more of a show me that you've checked the work that I've done.
So right, and it's about how you spin, in the nicest possible way, the message. And if you say to the students, you must do this, well, then some students are going to go, well, why? Why do I have to do that? But if you say to the students, if you do it this way, it's going to replicate what you're going to learn, and you'll be able to apply that in your assessment. They'll go, oh, okay then. I think it's all in the messaging. I really believe that. And I think that some academics will say, here is an activity, you must do it. And the students will go, well, why do I have to do that?
Sorry, I was just going to say it'd be very, very interesting to actually drill down and have a look at not the quality, but the degree of thought put into those posts where they are mandated, because what we do see is those more superficial, this is a really good response, thanks for that.
Yeah, or if you have a peer review requirement in your assessments and the peer review is thanks, how is that helpful? But yeah.
Thank you.
That's great. Any other questions or comments from the room? I haven't seen any other hands up. Just the Sarah's comment before, I was thinking about, like, if it is in a clinical school, then it would be a different, because in a clinical school, because some certain procedures and some certain skills that the student need to learn would be taught differently. So I think it depends on what's the requirement, and apart from what the assessment is, what's the knowledge or skill we're trying to achieve is a part of that unit, or the contents. And how, what different strategy we can use so a student can demonstrate that. I think that's where I would land. Celeste, if you agree.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Celeste and Colin, for a great presentation. So it's a provoking, and I think it's a continued conversations to have across different disciplines. So you can find the contacts. I suppose you will get on the email from the organizer in some ways. So I'm happy to stay connected and have continued conversations, because
I'm very happy if anyone wants to contact me and speak offline. That's not a problem.
Yeah, sounds great.